Valerie White to keep time for the board. The board will then dismiss all parties to consult with our legal counsel. Finally, the board will open a public meeting to render a decision upon the board's normal process of taking action. The board will direct legal counsel to draft an order reflecting the board's decision within 5 working days of decision being rendered. I believe this covers the points that are necessary to review prior to the hearing. Mr. Porter?
Yes, Chair Timchuk, just one quick, there's probably a couple scripts out there.
Okay.
And there's the one that actually reverses the order because this is a just cause hearing. And so what you described is generally right, but the administration would go first in this hearing.
All right. Thank you for that correction.
Apologies.
All right. And with that, the administration, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Madam Chair, we are ready to proceed. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Human Resources Officer Debbie Simons for the administration.
Good afternoon, Board of Directors. As this matter is a very serious one, and it is something that is a decision that is not taken lightly. Anytime one is considering terminating someone's employment, it is something that requires great consideration and a consideration of whether there's any other alternative that could remediate the situation. Mr. Hitting was initially placed on paid administrative leave, and I would like to refer the board members to my recommendation or the termination of employment letter that's dated May 14th, 2024. And so at that, as the events that occurred between his first communication with his principal about requesting his child to attend Take Your Child to Work Day, there were a number of events that occurred in that process. And so when he made that request, this was a fairly low-level request that could have been remediated at a low level between himself, HR Director Dalby, and his supervisor. When the supervisor received the request, she then consulted with Director Dalby, who is present today in case there's any questions the board has about events that led up to Mr. Hitting being placed on paid administrative leave. However, when the supervisor consulted with Director Dalby expressed some concern about potential liability of having a child on site. As the board knows, we operate outdoor school sites throughout the state. We serve approximately 11,000 students, and we serve those students primarily in 6th to 12th grade. Director Dalby expressed some concern. The supervisor responded back to Mr. Hitting that his request was not going to be approved that afternoon. The following morning, he contacted the supervisor with an OSEA representative regarding staff handbook and the response that he received. Around the same time, Director Dalby contacted Mr. Hitting and his union rep along with the supervisor, Principal Jensen, requesting additional information to see if something could be worked out. One of the questions was about supervision. At the time this incident took place, the primary assignment of Mr. Hitting was the Washington Service Center, not an outdoor school facility or campsite. His responsibilities were not assigned at a campsite, but more in an office setting. And so the question around who would supervise his child while he was completing his work duties, or in the event that there were work duties that pulled him away from the work, who would supervise the child? In one of the emails, Mr. Hitting, and I believe that may be his child with him this afternoon that we saw early on, was 6 years old. And outdoor school locations serve students in 6th grades or other middle school level students, which is a significant age difference. His response to Director Dalby's request for 9 additional questions and comments, and also stated, I hadn't scheduled anything for the day and was going to use that golden opportunity to have his child experience outdoor school. Additionally, he stated, on a side note, if you happen to identify as a person of color and there is any slight possibility you inadvertently just unilaterally usurped power from a person of color who demonstrably should have had that, maybe you could informally touch base with the equity department, or we can bring them on this thread to weigh in if that's going to result in an anti-racial workplace, or there may be a different path to a mutually acceptable resolution that satisfies all parties' concerns. I will likely be asking them as well, so we have a shared understanding of where the focus of control resides, etc. It's the entire statement's in the letter. It's important for the board to know that his request for bringing his child to work was received on a Monday, and the date that he wanted resolution was Thursday of the same week. So time was pretty important when this incident occurred. The principal then responded, making it clear that Catherine, or Director Dalby, had not usurped any power, and she was resentful that there was any kind of racial tone to the message, as she had consulted frequently with Catherine, and Catherine had provided a great deal of support to outdoor school. Director Dalby invited everyone to meet at 8 in the morning the next day, to which Mr. Hitting responded, "It's not worth my time, not worth it on my end." So on Wednesday, the day before the request was wanting to be resolved, he sent a lengthy email to Principal Jensen again, asking to bring his child to work. In that email, he indicated that he was struggling with childcare and that the child is also struggling academically. About an hour later, Principal Jensen reached out to Director Dalby to let her know that she had met with Mr. Hitting and the meeting did not go well. In both the conversation with Director Dalby as well as the written summary, what happened in the conversation between Mr. Hitting and his supervisor was one in which his behavior was aggressive, it was hostile, argumentative, very disgruntled. The supervisor told him she felt like he was being disrespectful, and his behavior escalated and became more aggressive and more argumentative. He then pushed her to produce a policy that he believed applied to the situation, and then aggressively, in a manner that the principal has reported, she felt threatened. And I want to make sure that the board understands. As administrators, there are frequently times when we communicate information that employees may or may not enjoy receiving or may not agree with receiving. That being said, no employee in the ESD deserves to feel threatened when you're having a conversation that's difficult and challenging. As she was asking about the policy, he insisted to her, "Please open it to me and read it to me," which she did. And then he responded, "Do I need to come read it over your shoulder?" And so, to be clear, this isn't a large conference room that they are meeting in. Principal Jensen's office is a fairly small space. Later that evening, he contacted her at 10 o'clock on her personal cell phone. I've quoted the text that was sent. However, it does go on to say many things, but that you're diamond in the rough, truffle in the dirt, or oyster from a grain of sand. I trust you with my physical, emotional, and psychological safety, and you met my unmet needs with your presence, guidance, and leadership. Goes on, Principal Jensen is a quality administrator, and I would assure the board she is probably one of our best, if she is not the best principal that we have. That being said, to contact her well above and outside of working hours to send that kind of a message on its own would raise a caution flag. More concerning, however, is that Director Dalby gave a very clear expectation in his notice of paid administrative leave, which was very clear when it stated, "At all times, including while the investigation is being conducted, you are directed not to retaliate against anyone you may believe have provided information. And it also means you may not exhibit any behavior that could reasonably deter others from making complaints about you or serving as witnesses. It also prohibits any behavior that could be considered disruptive or coercive in your contacts with potential witnesses or others you believe may have provided information leading to this investigation. When we interviewed Principal Jensen, Mr. Hitting's demeanor and behavior was characterized as leaving her shaken, scared, and more so the use of aggressive threat to enter her physical space when he said, "Do I need to come read over your shoulder?" Unsafe to the degree that I want to let the board know when we scheduled the pre-termination hearing to discuss this situation and give Mr. Hitting due process and opportunity to present his side. She asked not to come because she was so uncomfortable. She has chosen at all points along the process not to come because she does not feel safe in Mr. Hitting's presence. That is an incredible, incredible feeling that I can't articulate for the board enough how unusual that is, and that feeling of being shaken and uncertain of what the next reaction is going to be. What's the next event? As I reviewed everything along the way, I also will note that when we had the pre-termination hearing, I gave Mr. Hitting very explicit directions. Present at that hearing were 2 OSCA union reps, Director Dalby, myself, and also Chief Financial Officer Jordan Ely. Jordan Ely had been invited as there had been some previous questions about different processes that are under Mr. Ely's responsibility, that if Mr. Hitting had questions, Mr. Ely was there to address those. And my directions were not followed even after giving 2 reminders of what the structure of that meeting was. In reviewing all of the information that was given, not only from Principal Akari, but through my own interactions with Mr. Hitting during the termination meeting, I determined that his request for taking his child to work was a very low-level request and is something that should have been resolved at the lowest level possible. That being said, to reschedule work to allow going to an outside location, along with the fact that our policy does not let staff bring children to work unless it's very clear, any staff member working at a program site outside the 4 service centers. So that would be anywhere that is not a service center. Mr. Hitting is assigned to work at the Washington Service Center. So this part does not apply to his particular role. Any staff member working at program sites outside the 4 service centers must have their program administrator or supervisor's approval prior to bringing a child to work. Other than this national observance, employees should not bring their children to work. Children are not allowed in any of our office centers or schools at any of the school districts within our region. The reason for that is that we serve, of course, some of the most vulnerable children in the region, the most vulnerable. There's a lot of student information and data that happens. The office setting where Mr. Hitting is assigned is often a public area where there are multiple staff sitting on site. As noted before, we serve middle school students, not elementary age students. Number 2 in my letter, Mr. Hitting violated the board policy GBNA, which talks and speaks directly to what the ESD's expectations are to hazing, harassment, intimidation, bullying, menacing, or cyberbullying. In my letter, I wrote to Mr. Hitting that his conduct was severe enough to create a work environment that a reasonable person could consider intimidating and hostile. Offers of help or requests for additional information were met with bullying type responses that was intended to intimidate not only a supervisor, but Director Dalby. And then finally, he used the ESD systems on his work time to convey many of those messages in a repeated manner that and unwanted, that resulted in a lack of safety and a positive working environment. As I said when I started, taking someone's job away and terminating employment is one of the most serious decisions to be made. And I understand that Mr. Hitting may have had a fairly low level request. However, his actions from that request and along the way have been disruptive. They've been aggressive. They have been argumentative. And at no point along the way has Mr. Hitting accepted any responsibility whatsoever for how his behavior affected others that he communicated and interacted with. It would be my respectful request that the Board of Directors uphold the termination as it was delivered.
Madam Chair, if there are any questions for the administration before we give our time back.
Paul?
Thank you. And thank you, Debbie, for for those words. And it is certainly something that none of us take lightly. I wanted to ask a couple questions about the behavior, the threatening behaviors, or the behaviors that led to his supervisor feeling unsafe and uncomfortable. You did mention, I just wanted to confirm that you did mention that it was a determination that from your point of view, or perhaps Ms. Dalby's, I'm not sure who did it, that the behaviors exhibited would lead a reasonable person to feel as the supervisor felt. Is that correct?
That is correct. Catherine, do you want to speak to you talked directly to Akari?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, really the impetus to place Mr. Hitting on paid administrative leave was following the incident, that exchange that the two of them had, that Ms. Simons described, with him saying he was going to read over her shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
She reached out to me and said, I can't be with him tomorrow. I just don't feel comfortable. And very unusual response from a principal. Ms. Jensen deals with conflict on a regular basis with students, with staff. She really handles herself well in very stressful situations. So it was a very unusual conversation to hear her have that much distress. And therefore, we made the decision to put Mr. Hitting on paid administrative leave so we could try to sort through the matter further. And there's really was a continuing pattern of a mismatch between our actions and the reaction from Mr. Hitting. Mm-hmm. He really had a big reaction to what started out as Ms. Simon said, a very, very low level request.
I'm curious, and if this isn't appropriate, certainly somebody can let me know, but had the principal indicated that there had been any prior cases where she felt things had escalated sort of in an uncalled for way or a mismatched way, as you mentioned before? And also, are there any other instances where others had maybe made reports or felt that Mr. Hitting had behaved in a way, or his behavior had changed in a way that they felt threatened, or that the demeanor was something different than professional?
I believe there was an earlier conversation between Mr. Hitting and Ms. Jensen. However, it didn't rise to the HR level. That being said, there are some email exchanges that Mr. Hitting had with some of our payroll and HR staff. I believe I included in the board material a response that I gave to Mr. Hitting. The reason for me auditing and reviewing what occurred in that situation was our payroll manager came to me stating that she felt as if the emails were harassing, and that while they had provided information, it didn't seem to be resolving the situation. And so that being said, I did go through and audit every step along the way to see what did happen, and my response to Mr. Hitting is included in the board materials. And while I certainly know that there have been many additional activities and questions and concerns Mr. Hitting has that are outside of the termination, those communications regarding those situations are characteristically very similar to what payroll and HR was receiving at the time, and some of the other written communications that I think an outside person could see are not on a minimum level, they're not professionally appropriate. And depending on your role in the ESD, could be taken as harassing or threatening.
Thank you.
Any other questions from directors to administration? I can't.
Thank you.
Let me go back to, I need to go back to the gallery to see, make sure I'm not missing anybody's hand. I do have a quick question from the timeline of when Mr. Henning was put on leave and investigated, due process of investigating. Can someone give me a timeline of how long that investigation took and who that involved?
Catherine, do you want to speak to the administrative leave? I believe it took about 3 weeks, is what my timeline shows.
Correct.
And were and at what levels was it? Immediate supervisor above, you know?
It was so the immediate supervisor was interviewed along with all of the written communication between Mr. Hitting, Director Dalby, the supervisor. And then we notified him and brought him in on Tuesday, April 30th, which was the meeting for him then to present his side. At that point in time, I sent him a meeting notice letting him know that the opportunity to respond, that staff members had reported feeling unsafe, and that was his opportunity to respond. I believe we also provided some clarification to the Oregon School Employees Association about the purpose of the meeting. Would also point out to the board that Mr. Hitting was represented by the union and had been represented through the termination process, the lower level grievance response as well. And it is here recently that OSEA has withdrawn as his representative.
Thank you. Any other questions from directors? All right, with that, we will move on to the second part of our process. And that is hearing from you, Mr. Hitting. You have 30 minutes. And we welcome you this afternoon, and we'll let you take it away.
Unmute. Sorry. I have to jump to screen, figure out where this is. Can anybody hear me or no? Yes. Okay, perfect.
I want to be a scientist. I couldn't go. I wanted to go to outdoor school, but I couldn't. I like nature, but especially fish so much.
My wife's not able to make it here today. She's out in the community doing some good outreach for our care providers in the great state of Oregon.
Hello, this is Grace, mixed wife. I'm aware allegations of perfectionism, perception of safety, and insubordination. for sick time being reported and apology among Mick. As far as I know, Mick is a very great person and he's very focused on safety. These are some examples. When he was working in China, Mick organized women pay equity for equal pay in China. He initiated it just by hearing of injustice by Chinese female staff. The second situation is during one of the activity he was running was the swimming, and he saved 3 kids from drowning in 30 minutes. And Mick also during the last employment when he was on break, he intervened in kid who was having suicidal thoughts and reported it was helpful from his former employer, the supervisor of Kari. And on his last employer, our family had over $1,000 missing from our family of his last paycheck. He also sent me videos showing the allegation of safety were false on occasions. The secure door opened for his badge, and I was a witness. He did not enter and let the doors close each time. As an immigrant and a woman of color in the US, my biggest fear and concern here is the gun violence, especially for my trial. He is still, attending the primary school. I have been very shocked. The same people accusing my decent husband of professionalism and safety failed to have an end of work checklist, not even asking questions during his separation of his previous employment. If you cannot put him back to work with a warning, please consider a fierce severance settlement. Thank you for your time and have a great year, everyone. Thank you.
Sweet. And just make sure, give me a thumbs up. I still got audio. Yeah, awesome. Sweet. So I just kind of want to start from a huge level from 40,000 feet and then kind of work down into the nuanced minutia. So first, I am trained as an early interventionist. Like with little kids, I did outreach for hooking up preschoolers to their kindergarten to make sure that they didn't have that anxiety. I was a bilingual interventionist with elementary schools for Spanish. Yeah, I love nature. I was a labor rep and advocate for contract enforcement, especially with unfair labor practices with SEIU for 5 years as a senior organizer and rep. I was formally trained as an investigator for due process. So I was kind of alarmed that my due process did not contain questions, and seemingly for a reason. I'm multilingual or a polyglot, and I speak 10 different languages. Outdoor school was my dream job doing the education and outreach because it was equal parts outreach, community building, teaching, and equity. So it was really cool to be underneath Akari, and especially with her being so gung-ho for being able to kind of use empowerment and have staff be able to have fun with it. So it was quite a beautiful environment. Due to luck of the draw, I never had a positive, delightful interaction with our HR department. So at the ESD, per the union leadership, I did have a quote that's in one of the slides, that they have also never witnessed or seen an organization that's on such a power trip with their HR. So the notice of termination, if any positive recognition or service, those were emitted or omitted from the record. So I was talking about the impeccable ally training that didn't get inside of the dismissal stuff. as well as some of the stuff from our liberatory design, which I feel are germane or overlapping for the circumstances. For some reason, they're just not in my side of the story, and it seems to be focusing more on the negative stuff. So at the IST, I think it's Interactive Services. We had these monthly meetings that we were to go to. And when I was at those, we learned that there's a honeymoon period that kind of happens after your first year to the third year. And staff get pretty disenfranchised from the process. And they kind of realize that there's a shift as they see kind of behind the scenes how things really work. So an example of this would be Ryan Velasquez, I believe his name, saying that we are kind of given our marching orders. So that's kind of what we're hearing from people who are even the top, is that those marching orders are coming down. So as far as that kind of ground up organic, even our higher ups are saying that that's not necessarily the case. Also, Mr. Popinski, I forget, first name maybe John, was saying that because the higher ups never tell me nothing, and then the whole room kind of laughed to kind of acknowledge that, yes, that is kind of the case. So even though we took about a lot of interactive stuff for the employees, in practice, it's not necessarily always the case. And we were talking about that specifically at our IST meetings. There was a somber tone with the previous principal, who was John, and it was abruptly let go and walked out by a union colleague. And this was reported that the other person that is non-union wasn't comfortable with that experience. So when they ended my work, I want to note that there was an absolute high, and also that wasn't in Debbie's letter. And I think that that's for a reason. So I was lobbying at Trickle Creek for the state reps for continued funding for outdoor school. I did a special ed classroom visit with my little guy's turtle. So if he ever grants me consent, I can take his little tortoise on outreach. So I believe we went to Columbia Academy, which has a lot of different behaviors, as well as people on IEPs and 504 plans. This was great, and I got accolades from the principal that they really appreciated this. I really want to stress that he had a 7th grade whole class that couldn't go due to COVID. And then out of my own initiative, I let him know that you can ask Outdoor School via OSU to ask for special permission because they were in that COVID. You guys don't have a huge population of 100 kids. And then I kind of told him how to advocate for that. And then when I went back for the classroom visit, he reported that he got that for the 7th graders, and he was quite delighted. Another thing with that school, we had a kid with anxiety, and he didn't want to go, but his mom did. So I was able to meet with them privately to be able to kind of talk it through, because at least we want the kid to make an informed decision, because sometimes we force them to go to outdoor school. It might just end up with a call home for them to not have a good time. So if they really have that informed ahead of time, that was the main part of my job. The other thing that I want to stress during my last week is that I went to a BIPOC outreach at Liberty High School. I believe it's within Hillsborough. And for me, it was the best event that I've ever had for our outreach. It was babies all the way up until people that are elderly, and everybody was super engaged. And I would say NOS, or our Northwest Science School, was the best, if not the best. I did have this little nimble ball for our social emotional stuff. Step back, step forward, step back. Sweet. And another thing that I was doing is working with the coastal site nurses. I was working out of class as an interpreter and translator. So for example, we have to have all of the medications. So some of our girls that were age 12 and 13 are already on what's called mifepristone, is like a pregnancy abortion, or sorry, not abortion pill, wrong word. So a pregnancy deterrent. And if they don't actually have the container that it originally comes in, then the parents aren't allowed to have that administered to the child. So then I get these last second requests. So in my estimation, I'm extremely helpful for the organization. And I may be the only person that was able to have the high enough proficiency test to pass our Spanish thing. So for example, my kids showing the unearthing joy and some stuff in that about how to find joy with your work. And that's kind of what I'm talking about with the IST department, is that I was kind of hitting that 1 to 2 year mark where I was in a data entry project, which was getting pretty heavy. And so I needed something on the horizon to kind of gear up for in a positive way. So with legal stuff, we always talk about a theory of the case. So there is the liberatory mindsets that I was using, as well as I was experiencing some oppressive conditions. So one of the liberatory mindset is recognize or notice oppression. So for me, it's just about office politics gone wrong. And for me, I chose the side of the law, which is the contract and labor law. So I was viewed as overly assertive. So whereas they're going to say that I'm hostile and disruptive, I'm going to say that I'm assertive, just like my kid's being assertive for himself right now. So this was evolving, and it went from Akari being witnessing that she was uncomfortable to then a meeting where nobody witnessed that, and that kind of escalating to harm. And then it becomes hostile and aggressive and disgruntled. And again, there was nobody at that meeting to corroborate that. She is trained in what's called, where's it? This one, the Restorative Practices book. And that just says that we have to have ground rules because we know that equity is super messy. So when she had this meeting that we want to talk about this, it doesn't say that I want to have a restorative conversation. So that's kind of what happened at the end of the meeting is she kind of added that restorative piece, and we didn't have those guardrails to say, this is going to be mediated. This is what's expected. If things kind of go awry or pear-shaped, that's what's going to happen. So we can be able to do that. And hold that thought. Hold that thought. I do want to show the fine cone, but it's not as important for the moment. So I was doing that data entry project, and it was becoming painful for me with my neck and shoulders, kind of having that repetitive motion syndrome, which for me felt quite crippling. In 2023, I was given a buddy to actually help with the project. And for me, I wasn't being able to do that in the moment. So I had to do everything by myself. So for me, this one day of taking my kid to connect with joy, as well as being able to report back with parents about how good that experience is, I felt that I could do that safely, and that it was something that was permitted both by the policy as well as my supervisor should have been the one that was the person in charge. So I really focus on social emotional learning. So as you can see, my kid's not having huge meltdowns, even though he wants to be the center of attention. So there's a yellow zone and red zone. So I might have been in the yellow zone going into the red zone. But then again, with that private meeting that we didn't have ground rules on, there weren't necessarily those guidelines that this possibly could turn contentious. And if there's a call for safety, I forget what the quote was, but she's very familiar with the conflict. And for us with NOS, we talk about tension and conflict being a normal part of all human relationships. So it felt like a bit cavalier for her to kind of tag that on to the end of the meeting without those guidelines in place. Since before there had never been any type of issues with myself and her. I just want to talk about scaffolding and the zone of proximal development. So I created a couple of different slides to talk us through this. If you ever have that analysis paralysis where you feel like, what are these stuff saying? It's too much information. I'm just saying this isn't fair. This is a huge liability pattern for the ESD, and I'm trying to empower all y'all to make an informed decision and really be impartial. Just really try to imagine that this is in front of a judge. Y'all are the judges or the panel. So really having an impartial view to this, because in my estimation, up to this point, it hasn't been impartial. And there was reason for the employer via HR to kind of have ulterior motives. So I want to say that this has severely impacted my health. Just as today, I added to my presentation that my weight is down to 158.6 pounds. I used to weigh 170 plus. If it gets too into the weeds, just imagine that I'm saying that this isn't above board and that my employer, who is a public employer, has the burden of proof, and it has to be an extremely high evidentiary burden for y'all to be able to prove that progressive discipline wasn't on the table. So when I was a labor advocate, we always would start with the employers is that discipline should be corrective and not punitive. So just as one of our board members was saying, has there been any previous issues? There hasn't been any previous discipline. There hasn't been any previous warnings. When I went into that meeting, there wasn't a warning around that. When I was using those email channels with the OSC reps on them, they didn't draw that line that this is 100% expressly prohibited. When I went into the meeting that was skipping a wine garden, an investigatory or a fact finding, they skipped and jumped over that and went to a pre-dismissal. There were no questions in that, and they could have said, we've had real things of safety. We're giving you something that we need you to sign this and acknowledge that these are the professional standards of conduct that are going to be held to you at this meeting. That was not the case. So again, that's something that could have been the case. That wasn't the case. So there wasn't any progressive discipline. I'm saying there wasn't due process. It was biased and it wasn't objective because there were no questions. So when we look at examples of wrongful termination, it can be to discrimination. So for me, I am a member of a protected class. That's someone that's over the age of 40. In violation of federal and labor law, I was using protected and concerted activity, and I was citing that, as well as with the HRA thing that Debbie had said that had went back to March, where she kind of jumped on the thread. That was another example of me using that union thing where I can try to use my voice to enact change, because I'm familiar with this, and I used to teach this to our stewards as well as workers. Because you reported and refused to participate in harassment. So I do get that Akari is allowed her feelings, that she felt harassed simply by me calling her a woman of color. But as we'll see with the slides, that this is just being colorblind to the system. And I went to an impeccable ally workshop where that is the lowest organizational category. And we have to get all the way to anti-racism. So even if Catherine Dalby wanted and didn't intentionally mean to do anything of that nature, the system is still blind that she did take power away as far as the optics that I was shown. So when we look at harassment from the Cornell, it says that it can demean a person. So the way that it happened, there were channels where Akari could have told me exactly what HR said, but she kind of third-partied and scapegoated them. And then I felt that that demeaned her as a person of color. And I felt that she had an amazing reputation, just like Debbie was saying. So I felt that that did lower her character, status, reputation as someone. So she can completely disagree, but as somebody that went to the impeccable ally, I was also using my union advocacy to advocate for her as well. This is clear that I said that if we're ever going to be an anti-organization, that this has to be the case. So I was going through the board stuff, and y'all have some awesome, amazing stuff in there. So I did highlight that the Impeccable Ally series is there. And collective commitment number 1 is cultivate that anti-racism. So I felt like that is why I was hired for the job. If y'all look back in my interview notes, I say, I do not talk the talk, I walk the walk. So diverse racial perspectives, my son and my wife both identify as a people of color. And that decision-making process, that was hidden from me, and I didn't have access for that. So then this can go for retention, like I did already be dismissed from my job. Challenges in HR data just shows that they do have huge hurdles, right? So I'm not blaming them because they're saying they have 800 different people, but they do also have some stuff that they need to focus on and require that focus attention. So next, I looked at these board strategies with our collective commitments, and we want that experiential learning for historically marginalized students. So I'm saying that my son qualifies for that threshold. 4.1, early learning settings for historically marginalized students. Again, that's my son that needs this before age 3rd grade. I've been trained as an academic educator, and you have to get these kids to love learning, especially reading and writing, before 3rd grade, because if not, we know what those standards are doing. So for us with outdoor school, when we can have that golden moment, we can get back into the classroom and really invigorate and fall in love with learning. So for me, I felt that that was withheld, as well as there was some stuff where they were trying to evade the complaint and the formal complaint process. And lastly, we want to seek. So when I was asking these questions that they felt were very outside the pale that I'm not able to do. And again, I've never been warned not to do that again. I was doing that for the purpose of becoming that anti-racist as organization, which is our collective goal, number 1. The superintendent also has an awesome goal. I apologize, this is from a different school year, but I thought it was from this one. So we do want to increase those 3rd grade literacy rates. So even though he is in 1st grade, now he's going into 2nd grade next Wednesday, and he's already saying he's so excited to go. So I felt that this would be an awesome kind of thing to really kind of use it as a trampoline to kind of really spring him into loving, because that's our job as educators and parents, is to really get these kids to understand that learning is a lifelong process. And even things like tension and conflict, those are just things that happened throughout life. So the governing body, I saw that y'all are interested in fraud, how employees are alleging fraud and misconduct. So I'm one of those people that has a lot of information around that. How to communicate to the staff that fraudulent and unethical behavior will not be tolerated. I'm really hoping that that's the case. And are you aware of any pending or threatened litigation? Absolutely. Next, I am aware that with 16508 is falsifying business records. So that's a false entry. If you alter, erase, obliterate, or delete, or remove any true entry of a business record or enterprise. So Debbie, she might not have done this, but she referred to the date that I met with Akari, and she said that same night I contacted her. That is patently false. She might not have mean to lie to y'all or put forward a falsehood, but that's what she did. And I'm not saying that, if she doesn't have the timeline that she's trying to do that, but that's one example. So with OSHA, you're not allowed to provide false information to OSHA underneath the OSH Act. The text here shows that that happened. I'm a state's witness, that as a cooperating state's witness, I swear that there are numerous falsehoods and lies, and that this response for the district is not what I was expecting.
Mr. Hagan, you do
Please.
have 9 minutes left. I just wanted to give you.
No,
time.
that's wonderful. Awesome. Oh, she's giving a time check. Super helpful. Okay, so expedited lack of process. So this had to be fair and objective. So for me, not having a fact-finding wine garden or investigatory meeting, that is kind of, how is that objective if you're not asking questions? Policies and rules, they can't suddenly be reversed. So if they're calling it a low-level thing, they should have been able to do that in ahead of time. So Akari isn't trading on CBA application, but Catherine is. So they bypassed that, and they did that intentionally. So with the past practice, they didn't even police what it was. And with the discipline, they wrote that I violated just by requesting. So where I have information that says I am assigned to multiple sites, even when I applied. And the most recent one that went on the internet also said that that person is multiple sites. So Pacu used to bring his kids. John Jackson used to bring his kids. Corey Gibson was a witness that somebody within the ESD had brought their kids, even outside of take your kid to work day. So you can't just reverse those without doing that. The past practice for these contentious conversations that resolve restorative is that we set those groundwork and have that willing participation. So if there's stuff around aggression and hostility, we kind of need those guardrails to be able to keep that on the rail. That is our practice and past practice. So I do have some stuff as far as I had paid admin that wasn't paid. So if we're calling this professionalism, I'm saying that my family lost out $1,000. I have slides that show that I went from 170. I haven't slept since March when the HRA VIBA, because they tried to steal $3,000. And then they provided me with a false financial statement to say that that's not the case, that they have no obligation. For me and my union work, they have 100% obligation to not unilaterally reverse a decision like this. And then also, if I can read from one of the union leadership, this HR department is awful. I don't understand why they are so determined to put us in our place. It's the most insane power trip I think I have ever seen in an organization. So I got denied FEMLA, and I have doctor's notes showing for the paid admin leave that a doctor said that that was me being out. I have Catherine Dalby saying that I'm eligible for all benefits while I am out on leave, but they wouldn't apply that retroactively. Some of the restorative stuff, engagement, explanation, and expectation of clarity. This is really important. Employees should know upfront what are the standards they will be judged on for penalties of failure. So I'm not saying that that meeting didn't get heated. And if I do run up on time in my timer things, I would calmly request for a little bit more extra time if y'all aren't having tummies grumbling for dinner. So just for her choosing to kind of do that, it felt a little bit cavalier that that the director of or chief of HR was saying that she has incredible experience on this. She should have known to have a witness or to say that this is about that restorative. And really, I want to talk about that racial piece. And then I would have really been on a different thing. Whereas I had an email that is went to the lawyer that said that y'all should read it because I would only attend a meeting if it had documentation. So for me being in her space, it was because I needed to see that too, because we're doing some interpretation. Here is from the Department of Labor about how to do investigations. Initial questioning. Notice the word questioning, not presenting documents. Not likely to cause hostility. So for her presenting stuff, it felt like a flood of documents. And without these questions, for me, I didn't even know how to respond. Ask questions, ask straightforward and frank questions. Give the interviewee ample time. That was something that they were saying was contentious and hostile, as me kind of trying to clarify. Give an interview an opportunity to explain his or her answers. Ask questions, follow up questions. They could have scheduled another meeting. They chose not to do that. That is a huge liability for the district. Follow-up questions are also needed. This was an intentional choice that they did a presentation of a flood of documents. Two of the most things that I pushed back on at that meeting is where they said that Akari said, how do we move forward after they quote unquote interviewed her? They didn't give me those interview notes. I asked, where are those notes? They assured me that there are no notes. And then the next one where she said she's not comfortable coming to the meeting, I said, can you produce that in writing? And they said that was verbal. And so they took it as me being hostile to assert my rights to know what the evidence was being used against me. So then the unbiased and fair objective person, which was chief investigator, she said that we have a firsthand account. She's supposed to be impartial. She's not supposed to be a part of the we. That shows that she is a little bit biased and unfair with that. So the professionalism also can have a two-way street. So in the communication with Akari, I did notice that I was calling HR hostile. I had said that I wanted to file a complaint around Catherine. She opens up with a cold email, not even saying, dear Michael, and just Michael, putting me in my place that I am underneath her. And she evaded a complaint process and didn't even say, you know, you can do that, but I'd really like to work with you around that. And I also talked about the pay equity because the employer, they circumvented the contract and state law, and they wouldn't give me the determination. And I did that as a white guy, just trying to spot check the system. So the employer has that information that I was having difficulty sleeping. It had a health concern. I was calling HR hostile, that they were having that perception towards me. You could hear about the EEOC complaint. And so we have a if but for. If Mr. Hitting wasn't engaged in union activity, would all of this happen? Would Catherine then choose to investigate and then prosecute against the person who wanted to file a fair complaint against her? So I'm saying that this is an abuse of power as well as a conflict of interest. So it kind of migrates from that highly uncomfortable and he harmed me. And then when there's no witness and we could have had those guardrails like the book talks about with restorative practices, then there's no witness. And then all of a sudden, this harmed me and I got 28 minutes. So if y'all want to think about in the next 2 minutes, if you would kindly let me get through a couple more slides. I do understand it's a lot of information and I am talking fast. So multiple staff, they didn't have anybody that was outside of higher ups. So this included 2 HR steps that had ulterior motives, as well as Akari. Akari did say that this harmed me and I'm not comfortable, but then I don't know that she said any of this because if she was interviewed, those haven't been given to me. That should have been a second process and a second meeting for them to say, hey, look at these texts. She says that she's scared, right? She's on FEMLA because she can't do that. That is not the case, and I haven't seen that. So some tests for protected activity, decision-making, terms of employment, it affects multiple employees. Like Pac is still there and he has several kids who are, adopted. And so if he can't do a childcare swap, it makes us having, the ability to have someone backfill for a site supervisor impossible just because the practice was reversed by Catherine, even if she's not knowing that you do have to kind of do that without looking at the CBA. So to protest about the decision, I would say with the email that I was protesting it, not to merely ask questions. Yes, I was doing both of those things, but also with the equity, trying to figure out what's in her position description. Is she my, superior that I didn't ever get introduced with? So was this the first opportunity to address the situation? I thought so, yes, but I was trying to do it with my supervisor who actually put a falsehood and lied to me. And she said, they said no. When I was given the text messages, that is not what it said. So that was a falsehood that kind of amplified things. In my vision, a not fair and more biased one. So again, if your timer goes off, I really would beg and implore you just to give any extra time as you feel. Concerted activity, so benefits others' working conditions. You cannot discharge, discipline, or threaten. A single employee can engage in that protected concerted activity if they're acting on the authority of other employees, bringing group complaints to employer's attention, or trying to induce group action. The president of my local said there is the #1 goal is getting things in writing. And I have a whole email stream from March where I was worried about the early childhood layoffs, that there's notifications that need to happen. So I cited every single.
Hey, Mr. Hidding, your time is up. It is at the discretion of the board chair to grant you more.
So, Mr. Heiding, I'm going to ask you, first of all, how many more slides do you have in your PowerPoint? You're on mute.
Thank you. I have 70 slides total, but I'm okay to just get through whatever because I know that y'all have dinner. For me, it feels like all these questions could have been asked at the thing, but again, I wasn't given that. So I want to respect y'all time. So whatever time you would give me, I would be so much obliged for.
And I want to assure you, this is not about that we are up against our dinner time. This is what we are on the board of directors to provide a proper format of this. I think what you have to know that we have also been given a big packet of information, of emails that have been back and forth. I am willing to grant. I think even if we were to give you another hour, I'm not sure that that would be the time in which you're trying to make up. I think that what I would like to do here is, given your 30 minutes, is I would like to provide you 5 more minutes of making a presentation and then allowing time for the board, because I think that's what you should know is the board is wanting some clarifying. We've been giving a bunch of information. We just want to hear from you directly and be able to ask you questions. So if you could take 5 more minutes and then we can ask you questions, that's how I'd like to conclude your part of the presentation.
That would be amazing. Yeah, the hour would be too much, but I think that I could do that. Thank you so much. And give me a thumbs up if you can still have audio. And so sorry for doing the micro machine guy that talks too fast.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So 5 more minutes, Secretary White. Okay.
Let me see if I can do that. All right, 7:05 for 5 minutes. Okay, so this one shows that the most recent one was scheduled at multiple locations. So I was scheduled to go to site over 6 times within like a month and a half from when all this happened. Like I was doing the lobbying for the IST department. We were going to go to site at the end just to be able to enjoy that, as well as I was going to go with Akari on a scouting mission. So that is one thing. The one that I filled out, this one said see multiple locations. So it's in yellow. So multiple locations. That's me. I work for Outdoor School. What I have to do is go to all the different sites because parents have so many questions. Where is the bathroom? How many meters to the bathroom to be able to get there? What exactly is the food like? Do you have pictures? I have to be able to go to sites for this. It's true during that week, I was scheduling my own time to be able to do the data project, but I did want to be able to do this and it was important to me. Next, so I did go to the Impeccable Ally shop. So this is what I witnessed to be that microaggression as well as harassment. I was using these liberatory things that see that recognize oppression, working to transform power. So trying to give Akari back any power that she may have inadvertently had taken from her. When she says, I am highly uncomfortable with you using this, that's a part of that fear and discomfort. This is messy, messy stuff. Whenever we do trainings on this, that's the first ground rule is this equity stuff is so, so, so uncomfortable and it's okay to not be okay. We want to embrace that complexity, take action to learn and attend to healing. So here, this shows the text that's that falsehood. So say, I'm assuming the answer of no. So when we assume, you know, it kind of makes a donkey out of you and me, and that amplified this unnecessarily. So Akari kind of falsified that record. So my reluctance in approving that. So again, she could have said it was a we decision, but Catherine chooses to kind of be cavalier and say my reluctance instead of our reluctance, or it's a group decision. But as a constituent with Families First, what do you think? So for me, with her evading that complaint and kind of doing that, that wasn't in line with what we're supposed to be able to do. So if we look at these, all of these got hit with that interaction. Intentionally or unintentionally excluding underserved marginalized groups, enforce institutional racism, decision-making at all levels. White supremacy, overly diminish other ways of thinking and being, are tolerant to a limited number of tokens, but maintain that status of that white privilege. Any challenge, that's me, is viewed, can't read it behind the things, but negatively. Avoid open discussions, right? Even in my discipline, it says that I wasn't allowed to do that. So skip into the next slide. symbolic. So if people are unaware of continuing patterns of white privilege, so even if Catherine wasn't aware of that, and she might really take offense, wow, you called my professional stuff out for saying that I'm racist. I'm not saying it's not about that. We're at that low level and we need to get to the level. So everybody makes these mistakes, but not who will publicly express views or make waves. So Akari doesn't necessarily say that she's appreciative of that. This can totally be too much eyes on this for the situation. But for me attending the training, that's what I was supposed to do. So even official policy pronouncements, and especially that decision making, they should have gone by the past practice and the contract. So understanding the underlying causes of that, and there's kind of that incongruence, or it doesn't always square the knot, that tension and conflict. We want to eliminate and have no discriminatory practices, inherit or advantage of one racial group, so that my reluctance, I wasn't shared that SMS, so it looked like somebody did take power of somebody that should have had it. Encourage and investigate, that's me asking questions. So including oppressed groups, that's my son. Decision makers, that's me again, to still conform to the status quo. That's them kind of calling it a low-level request. And plans to be accountable. I never got any accountability from Catherine that she was evading the complaint that I wanted to file, that she could have said that I had the right to be able to do that. And then who was the one that was the prosecutor that didn't ask questions? It was Catherine. For me, this is ulterior motives. They could have recused themselves. It could have just been Debbie with a note taker to be able to do that, but that was not the chosen thing. So this is an enormous liability. So next one, we're trying to get to these anti-racist stages. So these are where I was trying to be able to go to. With me reaching out to Akari, sorry, I just lost it. It says you must also contact the supervisor. And again, Debbie just lied to you that said that that text was from the day that I went out to meet with Kari in that contentious meeting. This should have been at a Sunday before. So that's why I sent it at 10, because we need to be able to call out by 6:30. So the reason that I did that was because I understood that there was an ambiguity that says I am allowed to have contact.
Okay, Mr. Hitting, your time is up. Thank you.
Chair, I believe you're on mute.
Sorry. So we're going to open this now up to the board for questions. And if you could keep track of that so that we can allow the administration the same amount of time if they would like some time back, so that we keep this equitable. So are there any questions from the board? Let me get back to my gallery setting here so I can see any hands. But with that, I can see first up, Dorian, if you want to go ahead and start with your question.
Thank you so much, Chair Chemchuk. I have 3 very brief questions. We've gone through a great deal of material. My curiosity is first, early in your presentation, you mentioned being part of a protected class, being somebody over 40. I'm curious if you ever received comments specific about your age, or if there was something specific in this timeline related to that identity factor. Secondly, I am curious, out of a regular work week for you, whether that's 40 hours or something else, what proportion of your time is spent in an office setting versus what proportion of your time has been spent at outdoor school? And then finally, as I was reviewing information in preparation for this meeting, I did notice that there was a interaction where there was an offer for an additional meeting, and our understanding was there was a comment made about that not being worth your time. I'm wondering if you would like to provide any additional context on why that meeting was declined. Those are my 3 questions. So again, proportion of time in an office setting versus outdoor school, whether and why that meeting was declined, if you would like to share it, and then also comments related to age.
You're on mute.
This is the Zoom world we live in. Okay. So with the protected class, I was moved into a cubicle that was an office with Chad Stewart, and I wasn't given any input into this decision-making. And he is also over the age of 40. I used to be out with my coworkers, And this was much better for my morale because I would actually be able to engage in conversation and I didn't feel so isolated and lonely. So again, I wasn't included in this decision-making process. I've been told that we're going to have to move 2 other times, and I would also have to be able to move. This was very curious to me because the reason that I was told is because I need a lot of privacy, because I interact with parents in privacy, but we have a nurse, Brian, blanking on King is the last name. They actually require HIPAA. So keeping someone that requires HIPAA with the younger people, but telling me that I need more privacy, that a nurse that needs HIPAA, I didn't find that that was very inclusive with that. And I thought that that was putting me with other people just because I'm old. The other thing that had happened is we played a game on site in Cedar Ridge where we had to have the students guess how old we were. So one of the staffers came up to me and asked that. My response as an equity advocate is I am not comfortable with that because that's discriminatory. And that's just because I know that I'm above the age of 40 and I don't want people knowing that. At staff training, we also played a game where we had to stand in line and be able to put ourselves from oldest to youngest and kind of select out that way. And then there were numerous comments made around us being super talkative and kind of like the old school people that take up too much space in the meetings. Not necessarily on the same exact timelines before the dismissal, but throughout my tenure. Number 2, the regular work week. I would say within the 2 years that I have been employed there, I have probably on my 190-day contracts, probably gone between 8 to 10 times each year to site, but it would depend on my work availability. So this, I had about 8,000 entries to be able to make. So I can schedule a site visit as long as I can get that in my capacity and get my work done. 3, the interaction additional. Can you rephrase that? Because it's not jogging my memory.
Oh, yes. I believe that there was an offer to have an additional meeting, and the comment that I had read that you had made was something like, this meeting wouldn't be worth my time.
Yes.
So did you say that, and what was meant by that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I had asked her for some documentation and to even clarify that that was the official policy. And I got radio silence. She didn't say anything that, yes, I am your supervisor. She just said, I want to talk about this at a meeting. So we know that we live in a society that has too many meetings. So people need good information before they go to those meetings. This is also an unfair labor practice where she's, again, changing my conditions of employment where I have a fixed schedule. And then she puts me on at 8 o'clock. My son starts at 7:50. So if I'm having to be able to do there, that might be great for her, but she doesn't check on me to say if that's okay. So if she's not going to supply any information that's helpful for that, if I have an unfair labor practice, and then I also have to beg my boss, can I have extra over duty time for what do you call it? A microaggression that the HR did, it smacked myself of, I want to just withdraw this request. So it felt like I didn't want to be able to do that because they weren't being transparent with the process. And it had an impact to my son that I would have to get that both approved for the overtime because that would go beyond my thing. And it was an unfair labor practice for them to be able to just change my schedule at a whim. So for me, it was kind of part and parcel of the kind of putting me in my place. And I wasn't comfortable with that. Thank you.
Thanks for answering my questions, and thank you, Chair, for the time.
Any other questions for Mr. Hitting from the board? Paul?
Thank you, Chair Tim, Chuck, and Mr. Hitting. I have a question. You mentioned that you felt with regard to taking your child on the to work and to explore and whatever, that was important to expose children at a young age to be able to have some career exploration and to kind of, engage in a sort of lifelong learning at an early stage and form that. I'm just curious, prior to this, had you advocated with Northwest Regional ESD that they should have programs that allow younger children to participate or advocate for, extending the age range of the outdoor schools to get kids engaged sooner? Or was this just something that you felt your son would benefit from and not the other children?
So both, but I didn't necessarily have express conversations with Akari around that. What we were trying to do is we have what's called a SLAC, a Student Leader Advisory Council, and we're trying to introduce to them as careers for outside of the normal office setting. And then a part of my like career trajectory, I worked over in China and Hong Kong, and I was an outdoor educator and naturalist that taught kid these different stuff. So I would do very young age to old ages. So we also had parents make comments that they wanted to be able to come to site. So wouldn't that be cool if they were able to do that? But we could only do that if they were in a capacity where they could be a chaperone. And then with my outreach events, that's what I was saying was kind of the awesome thing, is because I could get all of those all ages to be able to talk about it, but not necessarily to bring them to be able to cite, because the way that the law is written, it's expressly for that 5th or 6th. So there isn't necessarily that funding structure. I think it's a great and amazing thing. If we look at our Nordic countries, they absolutely do that from the pre-K, and they kind of let those kids go even when it's freezing temperatures outside. So I'm definitely in that as an advocate for that, but I didn't have an express advocacy discussion for the childhood. But I think that Akari knew that my presence with my son would be safe. She never raised any issue of not trusting me. And like my wife was saying, I did respond to a very escalated thing where on my break, I responded to a suicidal intervention when I was in a different role. And I also had another interaction where I was able to kind of de-escalate with a girl who was actually having to be restrained and being able to go and get her weighted blanket and her stuffy. So that was with a different role. So I would be entirely excused from those type of duties. So I would just kind of be PR and present with the teachers to build that rapport, because when they give their surveys, they're trying to give feedback. So I would be someone that could be able to listen to their concerns, very much validate it. Whereas with our staff, there's kind of a us versus them, but really I am an intermediary between the teachers, the administrations, and the site staff. So I'm really kind of, much more fair as far as how I listen to people and try to share information. So for me, just going to site, it would be really beneficial, even if I'm not leading an activity and stuff like that, that I could still check in with people, check in with the teachers, and then find out whatever the kids that aren't having a good time and just, kind of say hi, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I have another question, Chair, but I'll wait and give the others opportunity if you'd like, or I can ask it now.
Why don't you go ahead and ask it now?
Oh, okay, thank you, Chair. And thanks for that respond, Mr. Hitting. I appreciate it. So I do have a question about you mentioned about restorative practices and setting, it's good to set some ground rules or guidelines prior to meetings so that people know what are the boundaries for communication to have successful resolution and things like that. I'm wondering though, and you mentioned that wasn't done in this particular case, but I'm wondering though, even in the absence of setting some kind of prior ground rules for an interaction or a conversation, I mean, don't you feel that, or maybe you could explain what you feel are reasonable levels of professionalism that someone should exhibit in a workplace setting with their supervisor? And there is a difference certainly between assertive and aggressive, and I think that it appears from your supervisor's perspective that line was crossed pretty easily, right? That from her point of view, there wasn't much gray area in the fact that you crossed that line in terms of assertive versus aggressive, and that was threatening.
So if I can kind of respond with some fraud that was in the second response, there was Megan McCarter that wrote that Mick had Akari say that he was being disrespectful and aggressive.
That's not what I'm not asking about that particular.
I'm just saying she did not say that. So she only said that you're being disrespectful. So with the evidentiary burden, they actually have to be able to show that she said that. So when we didn't have that, there is absolutely a line. And sorry for interrupting. So there is a line for that. So I tried to pause the meeting halfway. So my notes show that I did try to do that. She did then say, well, maybe going forward, we don't have this as a possibility. So then we kind of talked about that. And then she added it on, and I want to talk about this piece. And then she was writing in her notes of the account, which I don't think she was interviewed and asked questions on, that she felt that my lack of emotion was showing something. So for me, it's tone policing, that I'm either too hostile, aggressive. I want to call that assertive. and that maybe I'm in the yellow zone, maybe I'm respond versus reacting, but I didn't feel that I yelled or spit. The only reason that I got in front of her space or in the space was because I didn't have my laptop there. And so we could have been able to have those type of guardrails on. So I don't believe that I was being hostile, that I was being able to threaten her space. And then as the director or the chief of human resources said that she has adequate stuff. So if she ever felt those feelings, she could have ended that meeting immediately. It even says at the end of her report that she agreed that she wished that it could have gone better. So if she ever had that thing of safety, she either wasn't trained or it's a little bit different that they didn't have the evidentiary burden of a witness. So I hope going forward that there are witnesses and that with this restorative stuff, there's more guidelines and protocols. Because for me, I didn't know that that was going to be the conversation and that it didn't happen that way. So I did feel that I was being assertive. I did feel like I was able to cool. I did feel like I asked her at the end of the meeting, is there anything else that I could do with you? And she could have had the opportunity to say, yes, this kind of wasn't what I wanted to happen. Can we schedule a restorative conversation or follow up with that? And I absolutely would do that. She also noted on the record that Mick did apologize, which I appreciate. So all of the emails, it's very low tone. So if she's saying that she's traumatized, the way that she's writing the emails looks like she's just kind of uncomfortable. It doesn't look like she's shaking and can't do this. It does say that she's not in a place where she can deal with me again. So there's a bunch of kind of hearsay behind the scenes with HR that said that they interviewed her. But again, they forgot to take notes and pass me those notes that I could be able to respond. So as far as those being firsthand accounts, those needed to happen prior to my determination. And I'm not sure that those exist in the form that would meet the evidentiary burden to show that there was safety, as well as me being a whistleblower for them not locking the doors, checking in with the secretary, and then having guidelines saying, this is absolutely the last warning. If we notice any aggressive behavior in this meeting, we're going to end this meeting. They didn't have anything that I acknowledged or was given to me. It was all verbal, and it's all verbal for a reason because you can't trace it like that. So I apologize. I wish-washy went around that, but that's
Okay, thank you.
Any
Thank
other
you.
questions from directors?
you're being so patient. I love it.
I have just one question, and you might not be able to answer this because it might be speculation on your part. But you did not mention it in your presentation, but it was mentioned in the administrations, and it was also in the materials that we received. Do you know why, with all of the things, especially when it was against policy and the things that you talked about in collective bargaining, why your OSEA representative chose to drop the representation of your complaint?
Yeah, it's called a duty of fair representation, and they are extremely lack of knowledge for how this process works. And they chose not to do that. And then I had my wife go to a meeting with them. And then it was kind of behind the scenes that we realized that they just grieved this just to grieve it. They didn't actually have intention of being able to go that because we had it in abeyance with the HR to go to the superintendent. And normally you should bump it and then be able to negotiate. So they wouldn't even, negotiate a resignation in lieu of termination. And for me, working in that office, that's exactly what you do whenever you have a grievance. So for me, it was really weird. So everybody that I've talked to with SEIU says that I have to file a duty of fair representation. So I have half a year to be able to file a suit against my union with an NLRB complaint. So it's a lack of knowledge as well as a lack of willingness. They also have the unfair labor practice, which they're going to let the timelines run out. And then I've asked them for several information requests, and they just don't do that. So I don't know if they don't know how to do that, or they just take offense to some other thing with the union politics where they think that they can do the low level stuff. But the way that I would represent is if a grievant wants to go forward and they have a case, then they kind of have to go to avoid that duty of fair representation. And the employer actually has to have policies around that violence and negotiate with the union. So they only have a legal department that they have to pay outside to, as opposed to me, I worked underneath 3 different people in a legal department. So weekly and daily, I was able to check in with them about how labor law works. So I have a much higher understanding about how this process works.
Thank you. All right, with that, Board Secretary White, can you tell me how much time we took with the questioning and with the 5 minutes that we gave additionally to Mr.
That would be an additional 21 minutes.
All right. So I will go back to the administration, Superintendent Goldman, or Director Simmons. Is there anybody that would like to use any of the time that is afforded you?
I'm just bringing them back in from the attendees, so to give them a moment.
One moment, this is Madam Chair. We're in different spots, so we haven't had a chance to just kind of talk here, but Debbie, Catherine, is there anything that you would like to add? I think from my perspective, I think we've shared what we need to share on the administrative side. So, but Debbie, is there anything else?
There's just one point for the board. I would like to just respond and let the board know that the application for family medical leave and all of the medical information was received after the termination for Mr. Hitting was complete. And that is why, while the request had gone out, there had been no information or application from Mr. Hitting received prior to his termination.
All right. Anything else on the part of the administration?
No, Madam Chair. Thank you.
All right. With that, the public part of this hearing has concluded. We will now dismiss all the parties except for the Board of Directors, as well as Mr. Porter, our legal counsel, to consult, and we will be coming back into public session once we are done with asking questions of our legal counsel.
Thank you for your time. Thanks, everybody.
Chair Timchuk, Mike Porter has a question.
Yes.
The comment that this is the one where we are still in public session, and because it was a public session requested, the deliberation does occur in public session. Okay. The mechanics of the audience and who's in the formal room, which I don't know how to describe all that, but Ms. White knows, would be that the board and council would remain in the meeting room and others would be back in the more public space.
Thank you. So I'm sorry for that misspeaking, that you're still, everybody is on, but the only ones that are able to speak at this point are the Board of Directors with the legal counsel. So with that,
I am working right now to get everyone who should be an attendee placed in that space. Give me a moment. It often takes longer than it ought to. Madam Chair, Mike Porter also has another statement or question.
No, Mike?
Oh, I just didn't take my hand.
Okay. So for the record, we are still in a public meeting here, so everything is of record. And the attendees can hear us, but only the board as well as Mr. Porter can speak at this time. So with that, let us start the deliberation process. Are there any statements or questions? And then at one point we will take a motion. But are there any questions or statements that the board would like to make? Dorian.
I would just like to express gratitude for Mr. Hitting, for the staff, and also for you board members as my colleagues. We sifted through a great deal of information today, and I appreciate the care and deliberation that we've taken thus far.
Any other comments? Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I can comment a little bit on what we heard and kind of my perceptions and where the issues are. I mean, I do find it I find it a little disturbing that Mr. Hitting hasn't really seemed to acknowledge the impact that his behavior had on his supervisor. I think, especially in light of the fact that he seems to have had a significant amount of equity training, where we do learn that it's really the perception, not the action, that is important, right? I don't think it was fair to question the fact that his supervisor didn't feel threatened, right? She clearly felt threatened, and to the point where she was disturbed enough she couldn't attend the next meeting, and I think that in and of itself should suggest that I have a sense that I've crossed a line from assertion to aggression, and that's really troubling for me, especially when it appears that when there's been an action or something that had been directed by a supervisor or by human resources, things were escalated on the employee's part as opposed to any kind of sense of backing down and trying to resolve. So it really that struck me as something that is pretty disturbing with the behavior, and certainly seems that I think if I was making that same judgment about a reasonable action, I would have felt that a reasonable person would have found that certainly threatening and aggressive, and it certainly seems that the ESD functioned within its rights to terminate the employee.
Miriam? Well, you were up there. There you go, Miriam.
I just wanted to make sure I put down the hand and not logged out accidentally. No, I also I'm in agreement with Paul. I think Mr. Hitting has a great deal of training around restorative work and equity. And I think in just reading the documentation provided and hearing the information today, I think there was some great intentions. I can't take that away from Mr. Hitting. I think, however, I did not see throughout the presentation or his presentation today that there was clearly an understanding that there was an impact to his supervisor. And some of the statements, while they're not verbatim, I think there was mention that the supervisor didn't vocalize that they felt uncomfortable. And what we do know, when there's a situation where we're already feeling unsafe, at times it's very difficult to provide that verbal recognition of I don't feel safe, I want to stop. But there is nonverbals and body language that actually present that. I do feel that based on all the information that we, and the board went through and heard today, I do feel that the administration did have, sufficient cause and then proceeding with termination. And I do feel that, at least from hearing Mr. Hayting today in person or virtually, I do feel that, and I'm in agreement that the decision that the administration has made is a decision that I equally support.
Thank you. And Doug?
There we go. There is a monetary piece that was mentioned, and I'm curious, Mike, or is it someone else here? The $1,000 that is being that was brought up. Does anybody know what the $1,000 is all about?
That would be something that Ms. Simons would be the appropriate person to speak to, and I think it's at the chair's discretion as to whether or not you could bring her back to answer that question.
I think that could be an important piece, so I am open to having Debbie come back on so that we can ask her directly that question.
I have invited her back as a panelist. Give her one moment.
Hi, Debbie. Did you hear the question?
I did hear the question, Doug. There was $1,000 in some additional time when we terminated Mr. Hitting and pulled his timesheets. His timesheets were updated after that final check had been issued. We did then process payment. To my knowledge, Mr. Hitting has received all pay that's documented on timesheets. We have, through Mr. Porter, provided him a copy of all of his timesheets, as well as all of his pay records. We sent a check by certified mail. Our practice at the ESD when we terminate someone's employment is to send them a paper check and have them sign for it. The initial check was returned to the ESD as unclaimed. I believe that may have been when Mr. Hitting left the country to spend some time in Japan. Upon his return, we clarified with OSCA that it was time to resend the check. The check was resent.
Thank you.
Any other questions, statements?
I'm concerned, Becky, you asked about the union representation, and basically the response was that he questions the competence of his union, which is troubling. I mean, I got the sense of that he views himself as an expert in many things, like the equity policy and so forth, and it just seemed a little over the top.
Thank you. Ernest?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I believe that we're here to focus on children who are the most vulnerable in our communities, and to ensure a positive and respectful learning environment for them. And I don't think I've seen that here. And that's very troubling. Thank you, Chair.
Right, any other? Well, I'll give my observation through reading through all the materials and through the questioning here. Mr. Heng has a lot of issues with how the Educational Service District is doing its business. And I wish, and I know that there are many tentacles to this, and it's not something that's black and white and very straightforward. It's a complicated. I wish we could have focused a bit more on the actual thing, the termination part of how it came about and whether it was handled. But there was a lot of things in there, and I will have to say, what I was a bit bothered by is the many assumptions that Mr. Hing took on behalf of his coworkers and supervisors of thinking like this is what they should have been thinking, or this is what they meant, or this is what and that is not in evidence. That was he was just making a lot of assumptions on that they really meant this and they were feeling this way. And so I think that there are a lot of things that could have been taken as separate components in an individual complaint, but it seems like his time of employment, there have been a bunch of things that have just been added up. And then when this finally just came to a head and he was terminated, then all of these other things, he wanted to roll up into one, rather than the incident that occurred that led up to this termination. So I also feel that the evidence that was provided of how he and I'll use the word if nothing else, the lack of judgment that Mr. Hitting gave as being an employee of how he chose to handle this situation is enough, as well as the actual evidence of going against policy and the handbook is enough. But just it shows a real lack of judgment as far as being an employee of the ESD. So if there are no other statements or questions, can I entertain a motion from one of the board members? Chris?
I will move that we uphold the decision of the administration to terminate his employment.
Do I have a second?
Second, Russell.
Okay, it's been properly moved and seconded that we uphold the ESD's termination of Mr. Hitting. Is there any other comments to this motion? I will just say, based on what I said before with my observation, that I will be voting in favor of upholding the findings of the ESD. All right, with that said, I will call the question. If you could show by saying aye, nay, or abstain with a hand, all those in favor of upholding the ESD to terminate Mr. Hitting's employment, signify by saying aye and raising their hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? With that said, the motion passes unanimously. So that concludes this part of deliberations. Mr. Porter, now do we?
You have another agenda item, and that agenda item is that there was a complaint framed against Superintendent Goldman that was provided to the board under policy, I think it's KLR. And so the board needs to make a determination about whether to, and if so, how to handle that complaint.
So I hope that you will give, the board will give as we know with KL complaints, a board can choose whether or not to hear that complaint, but there's many things that can happen in between. It doesn't have to be an either or, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. There can be different things that we can agree upon as a board of the next thing. But what we have in front of us right now is whether or not to entertain, to hear the complaint against Superintendent Goldman under policy KL. And that complaint has been provided to us in writing, and we saw the complaint. So do I have anybody that would like to speak to the complaint? All right, do I have, if no one would like to speak to the complaint, do I have a motion on whether or not to hear the complaint?
I don't think that it's I mean, from my point of view, proper for us to hear the complaint at this point in time. So I would move that we not hear the complaint at this point in time.
I would second that.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded that the board does not hear the complaint. Is there any discussion about the motion? Well, I will state, as I stated earlier, if there had been more focus with individual rather than there is so much wrapped around this, it is hard for me as a board member to get my head around where the board would even start with what part of any part. There's just a whole lot of things that have been, between fraud and insubordination. There's just many things that were brought up in the complaint that it is way too broad for me to just take on as hearing as a board as a KL complaint. And so I would also be in favor of not pursuing providing a hearing for the KL complaint. All right, if there are no further discussions, again, I will have you vote with hands as well as verbally, aye, nay, or abstain from. So all those in favor of upholding that we will not hear the KL complaint that has been filed against Superintendent Goldman signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any nays? Are there any abstentions? With that, the motion passes that the board has chosen to not pursue complaint KL against Superintendent Goldman. Any other order of business today for this public hearing and special meeting? I thank everyone for their attention, for their professionalism, for their duty as a director of the ESD. And with that, I conclude and adjourn this special meeting of the ESD Board of Directors.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.